So let's talk about how Magnum PI came about, how it was developed. Was it intended originally as a vehicle for Tom Selleck, or did the idea come first?
The idea came first. I was working with ABC on just general development, figuring out what we would like to do, and I felt that excuse me, my feeling was that a detective show set in Hawaii was the right move to make right now. Hawaii Five O was going out of business, and I grew up with a show called Hawaiian Eye, which was a very simple show, shot here basically, but they would do all of those Warner Brothers shows in those days. They do a little location work. I just thought that the right guy in Hawaii doing detective stories was just the right move. Now that's a simple idea. That's not born of any breakthrough concept or anything. But I just felt that background with the right actor. So I started developing it at ABC, I think with Brandon Stoddard, and we wanted to be stylish, we wanted to be fun and whatever. And I think I mentioned earlier that on a given day, three things were thrown out of ABC. One was Battlestar, one was the Hardy Boys, and one was the development of Magnum PI. So back at Universal, which again it's an industry unto itself in those days. They said, "Do you have anything for CBS?" And this is the Black Tower. And I said, "Yeah, I really think that our detective show that was set in Hawaii would be the perfect thing to develop." So we went over there, we talked about it, and they said, let's go. Now, I had two shows developing for Hawaii. One was Battles, which was going to be Bill Conrad as a detective in Hawaii, while being a coach of a football team, University of Hawaii. And the other was Magnum. Now, Don Belisario had worked for me, and it was almost like we were going to lag quarters for which show would you like to do or whatever. But along came CBS saying, if you could get Tom Selleck, you've got a commitment. Because they had done a couple of pilots with him. And I think one of them was with Kennel. Mm-hmm. And I know that he had three pilots that had not sold previously. And he liked doing the Sacketts, the Western stuff he was doing. And he wanted out of his Universal contract. Sounds familiar. That's when Bob Wagner wanted out of his. Now I got Selleck wants out of his. His lawyer went in and did the definitive hatchet job on me. Glen Larson won't stay there. You'll be all alone on the island. What he's trying to say is to the studio is that Tom has really good reasons to leave. Now, Don has worked with me on a couple of shows. He did Battlestar. Against my advice, he took on Quincy. And I said, you'll have a little... I know how strong Don is, and I know Jack. So I said, I don't know if that's a good fit. I warn you about that one. He took the show, and Jack fired him a few weeks later, as he had at least 12 other producers, including Michael Sloan and everybody. Everybody I took to the set, he'd fire. So anyway, we have this meeting. Now, I'm not in this meeting. I just hear about this meeting. And they say, well, Tom doesn't approve Glen because Skip said that, he won't stick around and boom, boom, boom. He said, so we realized Don Belisario had done the backup script for a previous project at CBS. Now, he'd already approved him, and he's on staff. And he said, what about Don Belisario? Well, he couldn't say no. He'd already said yes. So Tom was sort of cornered into doing Magnum PI, and Don wrote a script that was second to none. I mean, it was really, really good. And as it turns out in his career, there's two projects Tom did not want to do. One was Magnum PI and one was 3 Men and a Baby. It was like, maybe you get forced into some of the really good projects in life. But in any case, Don was absolutely terrific on that show. And he ran it for all the time. Well, not the entire time it was on the air, because Tom came in and took over at a certain point and things like that. But that's basically the story. We moved it from ABC to CBS. We got The Star, which was a perfect fit. I had based this concept, by the way, on a little of my life and a couple of other things. I wanted a guy who had, some of the trappings of fun. So making him, I had a house over there, and I had a guy who took care of it. He lived in a guest house, and I thought of the novelist Robin
Masters?
Well, Robin Masters was the name of our character in the show, but it's based on Harold Robbins, who had houses everywhere, but was always traveling. He was never at them. So that's where I got Robin Masters from, and the Ferrari, everything. I was always a little annoyed because I picked this Ferrari 308 GT, and so Ferrari gives Tom the car. I mean, how is that fair? Could have picked anything. Well, anyway, Tom was one of the sweethearts of all time. He was just really a good guy, and he loved the show, and he really became Mr. Hawaii. It affected the tourist business like crazy, because it was really, we know a young couple who own a restaurant there that saw Hawaii on television and moved there and opened a restaurant. So sometimes the work you do has repercussions you don't know about. Hawaii still do for a good show. Anyway, that's the basics of it. It was Don who picked Mike Post to come in and do the theme, which I thought was a great theme, and that's the story of Magnum PI.
Was it during the production of the pilot that the Raiders of the Lost Ark thing came up, or was that when it went to series?
I wasn't aware of that at the time. My feeling was that it came up later, that it came up either after the first season and there was going to be a window and they couldn't accommodate the schedule. I don't think it came up instead of, because that was a different battle as I remember it. That doesn't mean that's absolutely accurate at this point. I do know that the commitment came down to if we could get Tom. Tom was under contract. He owed him a show, and he got a really good concept and a long-running series that he liked, and he wound up loving it. So it all worked out well. Sometimes these things take a little finessing.
I should mention for the record that I was talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark because Tom Selleck was up to play the Harrison Ford role. But Magnum got in the way. I know you knew that, but I was thinking people watching this program may not.
I don't know if the timing is that specific, but I know that later he was offered Victor Victoria and Blake Edwards, and he turned it down. And then about 6 months later, Blake Edwards called me and he said, I just got a call from Tom Selleck. Yeah, he says, you all right? He said, we offered him a movie about 6 months. He called now and he said he's willing to take it. I says, and he had heard about the Raiders story. So, it's all timing. I don't know. You never know who does what, when, and how. And
were you involved with Dennis Weaver's son being on the staff of the show?
No.
It's Rick Weaver, wasn't it?
No, I think that came through Don, because Rick and Rob both worked for us in different capacities. They both starred in a bunch of McLeod's, episodes and things, and I didn't have anything to do with putting them on the show.
So
I didn't do day-to-day on that show at all. I would be derelict if I said I did, because Don did a magnificent job on that show.
So tell me how Knight Rider came about. Did you actually go into NBC and say, I got a great pitch for you, a guy who fights crime with the help of his talking car?
No, it worked quite differently. We had done one episode on BJ in which we had kind of a special car, a cop thing, and had nothing to do with Knight Rider really, but it sort of, it left a kind of a flavor in the air. And I had left Universal early to go to Fox. And in return for letting me out a year early, I said, I'll sell all my rights, everything I have for $1, because they're sort of famous for not paying you anyway. So, And I get out 1 year early, and they said, but you owe us at least one show down the line. And it's marginal whether or not that contract expired, it probably did, but Carrie McCluggage, and if you remember, I mentioned Dick Lindheim, they came over to see me. I was very flattered by this. They said, you're the only guy who could do this show. We want to do a show about a supercar. Now that's, a car that gets involved with fighting crime. Now that's the extent of what they told me. And I think the lawyer that did such a good hatchet job on me at Universal with Tom Selleck and all that, he became best man at my wedding and my lawyer. So he's now representing me. He says, I don't think you have to do this. And I said, I could get into it with him. And he says, you know what? I think this could work. This could be a good show. The only thing I was afraid of is because I want to make it a supercar and I want to do all kinds of things. The only thing that was haunting me was going back to my old braid when I was in NBC Page. They once did a show called My Mother the Car. And it was true disaster in the history of television. But I said, well, that's not going to stop me. Anyway, I took the assignment and went to Hawaii. I wrote the script in 10 days. I came back and turned it in. And actually, Carrie McCluggage came over and visited me while I was writing. And we brought it back. We turned it in NBC. They said, they don't even have time to make a whole pilot. We'll do a presentation. So we took 30 minutes of the show. Close to an hour, but we cut it. And we shot it. And they called me. I was in a car, and they called me from New York. It was the last pilot into New York. And they said, we don't know if we want a car that talks. We don't know about some of the other stunts it does, and we don't know about David Hasselhoff. I said, what did they buy? So they came back to town, and we talked them into about everything else that we said, yeah, the car's going to talk, and yes, it's going to do this, and it's going to do that. And we put. Now, I was doing all of this at Fox while making it for NBC. It caused all kinds of. It was kind of fun in a way, but because I was running dailies at Fox, we had the casting session for the three guys, which I already told you. That I had David Hasselhoff, Don Johnson, and three other guys. They said, we don't like any of those guys. And I said, what's wrong with Hasselhoff? Pause. He said, you want him? I said, well, yeah, I thought he did a pretty good job. He says, I'll get back to you. Called me back. About 2 hours go by. Okay, you got him. I said, boy, this is dedication and commitment. They're crazy about this. I figured they're really just giving us lip service. I don't know if they want anything, but so we shot it. We went to New York and we sold it. And, the rest is just, they ran the 2-hour movie 3 times in the first season. I found out America has a love affair with cars. Because I expected, okay, we're doing a good 8 o'clock show. Kids will love it. I got calls from every professional person I knew, lawyers, doctors, everybody. Boy, we like that show. And there's a convention coming up soon in Las Vegas with 20 replica cars there. And it's interesting when something catches somebody's fancy and they it goes. It just goes.
How did you decide on William Daniels for the voice of the car? I would think the instinct would be to give it a sexy woman's voice.
No, I was heading much more, candidly, towards. We're talking about a computer, and I was thinking much more of Hal.
From 2001.
Yeah, that kind of a presence, something much more supercilious. I liked his edge. I had used him in Battlestar. I had used him. I love him all the way back to Two for the Road with Audrey Hepburn and Albert Finney. Where he's counting paper clips and pennies and driving everyone crazy. That prissiness, I thought was interesting for the show. Aloof. I miss him now in what they're doing on NBC and amongst other things.
Was he your first choice, or did you use somebody else?
No, first choice. First choice. I love Bill. I just think Bill's terrific. Now, the interesting thing is that those two are a comedy team on that show, but they'd never met because the script girl does the lines on the set, and Bill would do his lines at the looping stage, And so they met for the first time at a Christmas party 6 months after the show's on the air, and a big hit. How do you do? I'm your comedy partner. And it was terrific.
What was it like working with Mr. Hasselhoff?
I had no problems working with David whatsoever. My deal on that show was to do the pilot. I got paid a lot of money to do a pilot and supervise 13 episodes and whatever that entails, but not to then have to worry. And this isn't, because I just want to be out of there. It's because that's the deal I made, and I'm at another studio. And obviously I'm getting in the way of other things that they're doing if I'm going to be spending all my time over there. And we hired Bob Sinader, who worked for Jack Webb and did a lot of things. I mean, there was a number of choices, and I didn't choose alone. The studio also had their choices, and Dick stayed very close to the show, Dick Lindheim. So once we launched that show and set the prototype, I became less and less involved. I think if you look at the pilot, you'll find that the pilot is a more sophisticated, funnier, more like a movie than most of the episodes. I screened the episodes I was asked to. I made suggestions on things I thought they should do or shouldn't do or whatever, and they had the right to decide whether or not they wanted to do those things. I noticed frequently they didn't spend the extra money or whatever I asked for, but one of those shows that just had a life of its own. And David I found very easy to work with, but I was not involved later when things either could have gotten tougher or whatever would have happened. The show had a charmed life, so he shouldn't have had an unhappy, relationship.
The car itself, obviously, the closest thing to it at the time was the James Bond cars. When you sat down to come up with an interesting supercar, what sort of qualities did you want to give the car? What special powers and abilities? And were you happy with the final result?
I wanted to find tools, writers' devices that you could work with in episodes so that the car could function. And I had a pretty good idea of some things that turned out to be, it's ambitious to say providential, but I used to think about cars that could sense the side of a road, or in later times could adhere to a paint stripe that might have some qualities of its own. It could even be sensitive just to a white line. But I wanted a car that could steer itself and had all of these sensors on it. I like the ejection seat thing because I could use that in a few things. For whatever reason, I was attracted to that Pontiac. It hadn't come out yet, and we got the first 3 off the assembly line. They were destined for Florida someplace or Little Rock, I don't know. And the dealer didn't get them, we got them. And I knew that car. It was very clean, very simple line. And it was, it turned out to, just to be a good choice. And that's seat of the pants. Either you're right or you're wrong. I think I was right on that one. And I got a young kid who worked for Mattel. He had never done any car stuff. And he came up with all the LEDs on the dash and things that are all common in cars now, but weren't at the time. I mean, they didn't even say buckle your seatbelt or anything else that and we certainly didn't have OnStar or all those other things which we have now. So it was kind of fun to sit down and think, how would you? I've always had some interest in science fiction, whether or not I always did it. You don't do it if nobody wants you to do it. And no one's buying it. But once someone says do something that's special like that, I'm working on the feature with the Weinsteins. Now, it's a whole nother bag when you have to sit down and try to reinvent the wheel and think of something new and different. It's easier the first time.
When you were making the Knight Rider pilot, how did you pull off some of the, obviously we didn't have CGI and everything then, how did you pull off some of the stunts, getting the car to drive itself? What were some of the tricks behind the effects?
Well, most of those things are mechanically simple things. You can put a guy to drive the car from the back, from the front, laying down flat. All of that stuff it's not electronic. It's really done mechanically, and the cars aren't always on the road by themselves. They're attached to a rig, and Car leaping. We broke a lot of axles and things. We just very little of that, which is so easy now, was easy then, and you just did it with the studio special effects guys who were great.
Talk a little bit about Edward Mulhare. How did he get involved with the show? Just typical casting process?
Once in a while, a show falls into some kind of a groove where good things happen. And Edward Mulhare, I had seen in The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, a couple of things, I guess. But two great things happened on that show. I should say three, because I think David was terrific for that show. Mulhare was perfect, and however his availability was, he loved it and wanted to do it. And it was like there was no casting calls. He said, well, if we could get him, it's a no-brainer. We don't have to think about this one. And the same thing was true of Richard Basehart. Excuse me, Richard Basehart. I say Basil Rathbone. Richard Basehart is a classic actor. To get him to play the father figure, and anytime you can take I hate to say it, but we're not live here, so I can say a bullshit premise, and cast it up and give it some dimension. I'll use as an example having who's the star of Star Wars, the father.
Alec Guinness?
All right, Alec Guinness. I grew up with Alec Guinness is one of the classic British actors of all time. You put him in a space opera, you've elevated everything to some classic proportion. Basehart, it was an automatic. So put David Hasselhoff between Basehart and Mulhare, you've killed 90% of your problems. The only problem I had really with David was that he had come out of soap opera. And, there's a lot of technique to the way they work. First of all, they're very regimented and locked into so many of there's blocking and all of that. I felt it was a little stiff. When I finished the pilot, I went back, reshot a few things, and said, let's put a feather up your ass or something. Let's loosen you up a little bit here, and let's try to, have a little more fun with this. And essentially that's all it took. It was just getting him out of that formula he had been in.
You did a lot of TV themes with Stu Phillips, but the Knight Rider theme is probably the most iconic. Can you talk about how that theme came about?
No, I can't. I can't tell you anything about that one. It's based on a classic. I've never even told Stu about it, so I can't tell you.
He's talked about a piece of classical music, a German piece or whatever, that might have been the inspiration.
No, somewhere along the line, I remember a little piece of, a classic theme. And the actual rhythmic pattern was brought to me by, he was a protege of mine. He went on to become chairman of the board of Paramount, and Carrie McCluggage. And he had a rhythmic pattern that came from something I have no idea now. I can't remember, but it was kind of it was that kind of thing that we used. It wasn't the theme, and I added the theme and some other things to it, and we put it together. I'm being a bit of a smartass. If I remembered the origins of the theme, I'd tell you. But I once discussed it with Stu, and he says, no, that's what you sang to me, and that's not based on anything, because I know more about that stuff than you do. I said, okay, well, whatever.
But when you did that theme, did you have any sense that it was any more special or different than the dozen other themes you'd come up with for your other shows?
No, I didn't love it more than the Battlestar theme, or there are some of those others. I love the Buck Rogers theme. It's one of my favorites, and it's because it's kind of like Bondian, with all those beautiful montages of the ladies, and I think it was sung by Kip Lennon, one of the, I don't know if you ever heard of the Lennon sisters, but their brother was a very talented man too, and I think he sang that theme. He was great. You don't know. It's a collage of activity and things you do, and you've got to sit down and do it at that moment. And I did a theme for a show called P.S. I Love You, and at the last minute I'm thinking, I really would like to do a theme for this, but to do it, now, Stu was off someplace else, or I just met a young group called Toy Matinee, and I at a morning Christmas show. And I said, I'd have to invite him down to Palm Springs for a shooting, and I'd have to sing this to him and learn how to collaborate and get him involved and whatever. I said, oh, well, I'll do it. There's that thing I said, will something through. He came down. I sang this thing to him. We made a couple little changes. He goes up. He comes back a day later with it on tape. And the theme opens the pilot at CBS. And about 16 bars into the theme, Jeff Saganji says, I'm buying the series. He hasn't seen a frame of live action. He just loved the theme, and it said commercial to him. He knew it was in the cast, and he read the script, but it was kind of one of the signs. Now, is somebody here who knows the true story of this? Is Jeannie here? The girl he got to sing this theme, and CBS got to publish it and all that, the girl who got to sing it, about 8 months later, wins like 9 Grammys. It was Sheryl Crow.
Oh.
It's like, and that was one of those things where I said, do I want to go to the trouble of doing this?
So she sang the theme to P.S. I Love You.
Yes.
Well, this might be we'll get back to Night Rider, but to digress just a little bit, how important do you think the TV theme is to the success or failure of a TV show? It sounds like you've sold a couple of shows off the strength of the theme.
I sold Fall Guy off of walking in with David Somerville, who was a member of the Diamonds and joined our group late. And he had done something for some little stunt afternoon thing, and I wrote new lyrics that would go with what we're doing. It's a different show, but I wrote these lyrics and some additional music. We sang it in the office. There was no script. There was no anything. It was just, we're doing a stuntman who's a bounty hunter, and here's the theme. And they said, okay, go to script. And that was it. That's what we did. So obviously it can be important, and it opened the show. And from the time it comes on, he sings about Farrah. He sings about, saving Redford's ass and Eastwood and all these people. It sets a tone for a show. So music can be terribly important. I'm extraordinarily disappointed that NBC, Silverman and these people, Silverstein?
Ben Silverman.
Silverman. I'm annoyed with him. He just didn't return an email. I'm really saying, why aren't you using a theme that was 3 times, for Grammys, as rap groups all did it. It was part of a show that ran for years, and it costs you nothing. You own it. You publish it. And it really usually comes down to that whoever's scoring the show wants to put their own stuff in because they get extra performances from BMI or ASCAP. That's a silly reason to change something you own that is, it's of historic value, and it's a comfort zone. Very important. So I don't dismiss those. I don't just turn it over to someone and say, hey, put something on here. Make it count. Everything in a show counts. Getting attention, getting the audience comfortable, maybe helping to sell the concept. It's all important.
Well, you've been blessed with some of the most iconic themes in TV history: Battlestar Galactica, Magnum P.I., Knight Rider. You hear those themes and there's an immediate emotional reaction. How important is having a theme and creating the identity for a show in that way? You seem not to be the least bit reluctant to repeat a theme throughout an episode in scoring, in the underscore.
Well, the advantage if you have a collaborator, if I just shoved it at somebody and said, now you write the rest of this stuff, the deal I made with Stu is use the theme and you keep the performances, but use the theme. I'm more interested in the success of the show than grabbing a few bucks off of the underscoring. Mm-hmm. The main title, I'd get my percentage for writing it and so forth and so on. But the underscoring, if the writer is looking to do something else because he wants, he's looking for a few extra dollars off of the performances, you're going to lose something. And so that's how you work it out. You just And I suspect that happens too often.
Talk a little about the enduring appeal of Knight Rider. Why do you think it has become such an iconic show over so many generations now?
Like Knight Rider's the Lone Ranger. It's one man comes into a town and he has a little more going for him than people think, and that's a great theme. I didn't make that up. That's what it is. Right now we have people doing a show who don't understand that. They think it's a team. There was a show. It's one of the biggest disasters in the history of television called Team Knight Rider. They thought, gee, if you've got a car that talks to a guy, what about 6 guys and 6 vehicles talking at once? 12 people all talking at once. Brilliant. Put it on the air. And they did. It's a disaster. It was. Now they come back with the new Knight Rider, and guy's got a good sense of sex appeal and a few other things, but he doesn't give Knight Rider anything to do. He's surrounded by other people doing things, and that's not paying attention to the concept. I know I've read they're trying to adjust a few things and get back to the basics. I hope they do in time.
They didn't ask you to be involved?
But eliminating the theme isn't helpful. Well, they knew I was working on the feature. Look, there's a little bit of, when you hand something to a producer and say, we want you to turn this into something great, they want it to be theirs. They want to claim territory and mark it out, and they don't necessarily want any input. They have to pay me whether I give it to them or not. But there's a big amount of ego involved in doing this stuff. And I made a position a little while ago that said, if you're running something and if you have a vision, you've got to fight for it. Now, it's unfortunate if your vision isn't correct or very good, because you'll win if you're in charge, unless Ben Silverman gets in there and stops it.
Now, roughly during this same period, you're doing lots of pilots, but there's one in particular where you teamed up with Stephen J. Cannell, who at the time was, like you, a titan in episodic dramatic television. How did that partnership, that arranged marriage, come about, and why didn't the series go?
I would say it was a matter of timing, because I still think it was a great idea. It was called Nightside, and it was about all the people who work at night, from ambulance drivers to cops to everything. And Stephen was doing a show, I was doing a show. We collaborated on this. It was one of those things. I wrote the front half, he wrote the back half. It was a pretty good script. We both had a healthy respect for each other's work, and we thought it would be fun to work together. It was actually kind of interesting. I had a feeling at one point that he didn't want to step on my toes, and I didn't want to step on his, and it was kind of like, I thought you were going to do that, or you were going to do that. We had 2 prominent cooks in the kitchen, and I think the show suffered a little bit, most importantly probably because Steve had one foot out the door. He was going to go totally independent. And we were very conversant. He sat down and explained to me, he says, you can make star money if you get out of here. And so it was a transitional period. It's a show that should have worked. I wouldn't say the execution was flawless, because I think, again, we were not. I wish it had been the only thing we were working on. But he was off in Vegas during some of it, and I was putting other things together. By the time it shipped, he was off the lot.
And you hadn't started looking at Fox yet. You were still a Universal.
I don't remember the chronology exactly. I mean, we are compressing 30 years or something here, quite a few years.
This is 1980. Fits and Bones, was that part of the Universal?
Mm-hmm.
The Smothers Brothers were classic comedy team, had one of the classic variety shows in television history. We hadn't seen them on the air in ages, and then you brought them back in a light detective vehicle. How'd that happen?
Actually, he wanted to do a news team, cameraman and his reporter, and I talked to them, and I had known them. We had done the concerts together on the road when I was with the Four Preps. We once shared I love being around Tommy. We were checking into a motel, and the lady behind the counter says something to him, and he says, "The luster's worn off, hasn't it?" It's like, he was a great guy. We got together. We talked about this idea. He came over to Honolulu, where I like to write, And it was a great time, and we really had a good idea, and then it got screwed up. And the guy I keep saying I admire so much, Fred Silverman, decided like 4 weeks before we're going to premiere a show with two guys everyone wants to see again. Haven't seen them in years. Going to be a big, curious tune-in, all this stuff. Fred decides to put a variety show on the air about 10 days before we premiere with them. And it sucked away all their focus in terms of, press and all of that and so forth and so on. And I don't know if the show would have been a hit anyway. But that wasn't the best way to get the audience on the dial. And I don't know if it was the best show either. I mean, there are shows in retrospect, I'll tell you, we lost and we shouldn't have. I don't know on that one.
You had produced and created a ton of hits for Universal, made a lot of money for the studio, and it was really big news when you left Universal for Fox. Can you talk a little bit about your decision in leaving Universal and going to Fox, or going anywhere besides Universal? What prompted this major turn in your career?
Greed. Well, Universal would let you visit the money, but they wouldn't let you take it off the lot. So Cannell sat down, had lunch with me, and he said, this is nuts. How many shows have you got? And how many have I had? And so forth and so on. He said, we at this point, that attorney I talked about, Skip Brittenham, is a partner with Cannell's attorney. So he said, you really ought to give some thought to it. And I didn't have that much time left on my contract. And so Skip went out and just started looking around town a little bit to see if maybe there was a better home and some real participation. Because you work hard. You really work hard. You can't do it forever. You shouldn't have to sue to get your money. And so many people have had to sue studios to get what they were promised in a contract. Jim Garner was one of them, and there's plenty of others who've had to sue for that. And that's kind of it's almost understood. Oh, we know you're going to have to sue us. We're not going to pay you any of this. So I made an honest deal with Fox. They were very righteous in the deal they made. I was able to pass along a nice piece of the deal to Lee Majors, who was due to come back for a series. And so I had my star. We had already sung, we sang for our dinner. We got the commitment. All I had to do is I put Lee with it, and then all we had to do was shoot some film. The rest of it was kind of there.
Why did you opt to go to a studio and not to do the Steve Cannell model and start your own production company?
I think that was on Skip's advice, and it's a really good question, and I don't have a perfect answer. I don't know if in retrospect I did the right thing or the wrong thing. It worked out very well because that first show out of the box was a big hit.
Now, we're going to talk about those other shows, but from standing back for a broader perspective, you had been at Universal for quite some time, had a string of successful shows. You moved to Fox, Fall Guy, big hit right out of the box. You did a number of other shows, but never had a success quite like the Fall Guy or Knight Rider or shows like that again. Was it the audience?
I think it's very rude of you to bring that up.
But is it the audience changing their taste, or was the change in the culture? Had you changed your approach to shows in some way?
I'll give you one example of what happened. We made 5 pilots in the year after Fall Guy. 4 of them got on the air. 3 of them got put opposite Bill Cosby. I mean, one at a time. A time slot which had a radiation half-life of about 1 million years. So nobody was looking over across the dial on that one. The other one went on NBC, and it premiered against the episode which explained who shot JR. So no one saw that one either. And I said, next year I'm not going to do 5 pilot. I'm doing 1, and I did. And it was called Cover Up. And sadly, we went on the air and we were number 1. We were beating a cop show that I think you worked on, and it wasn't getting any numbers. My star had an accident with a gun and died.
Yeah, we'll get
And
to
we
the
went
cover.
up. But I'm talking about
Right.
you brought up the subject of a number of shows
Right.
in a block at Fox. Well, yes, a block of them. It wasn't long before they sort of changed some of their policies, but they can't all work. And we had a hit, and we lost that one, Beyond Fall Guy, and a couple of the others. I don't think they got the shot they should have.
So let's talk about Fall Guy. Huge success. You came in with this song and you sold it with Lee Majors. What were some of the elements that made it so successful? Do you think was it?
Timing again. There's timing. Real People was doing a stunt every week, some super stunt to show the audience, along with all the other stuff they were doing. There was a motion picture called Stuntman. It was a terrific picture. A picture called Hooper was about stunt people. Steve, actor who did the Bounty Hunter, Steve McQueen. Bounty hunting it's a little like Quincy. Bounty hunting had never found its way into public appeal. First of all, people don't really like people being grabbed and hauled off the trunk of a car or something. We always tried to make it very sympathetic, so you're on Lee's side. But you have to pay attention to those things. Nevertheless, bounty hunting was a franchise unexplored that everyone wanted to do. Stuntmen was something everybody was interested in. They had made 2 pilots the year before, each with a team of stunt people. I picked one guy who can't make enough of a living as a stuntman, so he has to go out and do this horrible job, but he can use his tricks. So it was kind of a good idea, I mean, you're putting together a couple of things that maybe individually don't work, but you put them together, and it worked. And we did it in a way that Lee was a very friendly, jovial guy. He's got a cousin who's going to be his business manager, and that's a joke, It's just, and then Skip's wife was in this pilot.
Heather Thomas?
Heather Thomas. She was just a doll. It was a good little team, They kind of worked well together, and we took them in, and there was interesting stories. There are shows that have their moment and their timing, and if you can be on top of that public perception and sentiment and appetite, you got a better chance of making it than if you don't. And with that one, I felt was right on target, and we turned out to be right about it. So.
And you brought back Eddie Albert as a villain, even after your experience on
Switch.
Switch.
Even after you'd fired me off of Switch, yeah. Well, I thought of him as a villain, and I cast him as one. Actually, Eddie Albert was a fine, fine actor. All I was up against there was that he wanted Bob's part. He wasn't going to get it while I was there. I wasn't going to let Eddie Albert get the girl over Robert Wagner, so it cost me my job, but it didn't cost me a paycheck. So all I had to do was go do something else. So I got 2 paychecks. So I don't know who was stupid in that deal, but there's a rhyme or reason to all these things, and it's not all buried in horrible politics. Sometimes people do you a favor.
How did you find Doug Barr?
I think Doug just walked through the door in a casting call. I knew about Heather because I mentioned to you, we did a spin-off called Eyes of Texas from BJ. She was in that, and that was her first job. So, I mean, she was over here. I just knew that there was a perfect girl that could walk into that role. Barely took a casting call for that. I mean, we just had to simply introduce her to the network.
And Marky Post?
Marky Post didn't start the show. The show was started. This is kind of a sad story. It's really not one of my happiest moments. We took. It's going to take me a second. The lady who was in Psycho, wonderful lady.
Janet Leigh?
I think I put this out of my mind because it's painful. Janet Leigh played the role of Big Jack, the bounty hunter. Not the bounty hunter, the bail bondsman. And I thought she did a terrific job. I went away on vacation after we sold the show, and while I was away, studio politics started machinations, and I was new at the studio. It wasn't like I was trying to swing my weight around or anything. And they said the network really wanted to make a serious change there. And I said, but it didn't work pretty well. She said, no, this is they're pretty serious about this. We got you got to work together with this. You can't just tell us what you're going to do all the time. Anyway, bottom line is, I didn't stand up. I didn't stand up the way I should have because I thought she did a terrific job. And I came back, and they picked a wonderful girl, the girl who was in Get Smart.
Barbara Feldon?
Barbara Felton. Felton or Felton. She did that part. Then, about 2 years, once again, these same people sort of said, we think it's time to bring in Marky. And I, at that point now, I was into 5 pilots. And nothing wrong with bringing her in, nor do I really know at this point what the other thing. I only felt badly about the other one. That was, but Marky did a great job, and she was terrific in the role. You're talking about a fourth lead, and the studio has its reasons and things, and sometimes you don't necessarily get into negotiations or what's going on in some of those deals.
So let's talk a bit about the actual physical production of The Fall Guy. How much of it was integrating stock footage and how much of it was actually staging these elaborate stunts?
More stock than I would have liked. On Knight Rider, we did everything. Consequently, merchandising was huge. On the studio department of business affairs were very short-sighted, and they loved buying stunts out of movies, some of their own, some others, and then building around them, getting a car that matched it and doing this and doing that and writing it into the script. Sometimes that was a lot more expensive than it would have seemed. Sometimes they'd buy a stunt that was just incredible. But we shot a lot of things too, but I would love to have seen that truck have a little more. It had a secret compartment for hauling things and people and tools and gadgets and stuff. The show worked great, so it's one of those things where you don't like to second guess success. And some of these sequences that they had were, they were enormous. They worked.
So let's talk briefly about some of the other shows from this period. We cannot pass by Manimal. How did that come about?
I think it was Brandon Tartikoff's revenge. He needed fodder for these monologues he used to love to do. He'd like to get on the Tonight Show and talk about his day started off with manimal problems or things. And I'm sitting out there. They brought that to me, lock, stock, and barrel. This was not my idea, but I still think it was a good idea. But, we had to do all that stuff in those days with total makeup,
right,
and not with any CGI or anything. We had some serious staffing problems in that period. Fox, you brought up one of my problems at Fox. Fox would hire a bunch of people to do pilots, and the pilots would fail. And then those people were under contract, and they would come over and say, we want them to do this show, which without any serious experience. So I had a few problems in that world. If I could have hired Michael Gleason to come over and run a show like Manimal, he'd have made it work. I inherited a few other people that they thought every show had to be about an animal. And I said, I didn't quite get the concept. And there are things like that can happen to you. You just don't, and looking back at, this is one of those instances where, that's why I tried to thin out after we did the 5 in one season. Selling them isn't the entire game. Fox wasn't good at hiring people to handle shows that were current once they were sold. They were selling the pilots.
You didn't have the bench strength that you had at Universal, where you had the Donna Belisarios, the Frank Lupos.
You just put it much better than I did. I groping for words. I'm supposed to be able to be articulate here. Yeah, we didn't have the bench. If we had had the bench, I think there would have been a little better success record. Because we had a few good shows. I think Masquerade, was a terrific show.
Tell us about that with Rod Taylor, and you discovered Kirstie Alley.
Oh my gosh, Kirstie Alley was in it. Rod Taylor. We brought Sybil Shepherd back from the dead. She hadn't done anything for a while. We put her in it just before she got Moonlighting. We had Sir Oliver Reed in it. And they never even released it as a 2-hour movie, a cassette or a VHS. It was an amazing piece of film. Renee Valente, who's Producers Guild president, helped produce this. Peter Hunt did a great job. We did some of it in Paris. Terrific movie. Execution, again, tough time slot. Didn't have a blessed time slot. At the same time, we did Automan, and Automan was way ahead of its time. We have a studio wanting to buy it right now because it really was good. It's just about a guy who builds a computer that can build a personage. And it holds up great because I saw it about 2 days ago.
It was sort of like Tron in that you had computer animation, you had computer graphics, the character named Cursor.
Ironic you should say that because it was the producers or guys who worked on Tron that brought it to me and said, what would you think of this? And they brought it to the comedy, through the comedy side of ABC. And I said, gee, I like it, but I like it as a drama. And Desi Arnaz Jr. was terrific in it. I mean, he was just wonderful. And Lansing.
Robert Lansing.
Robert Lansing played the serious cop. And Wagner was on Broadway. I went to see him in a wonderful, big production in Broadway. I mean, he's a fine actor. But, sometimes some of these shows also are not the darlings of critics. Very rarely are they the favorites. They took a shot at Wagner in the lead, and I mean, that's something I wouldn't repeat here, but it had innuendo to that was sort of strange. I mean, it's like if they didn't like the show, that's fine. But we make shows that are not going to be the darling of critics. They have traditionally or usually found really nice places in the homes of the people that we really need to make them successes. And I suppose that should be enough. I saw a movie the other night I just thought was brilliant, and someone told me the Times gave it the most scathing review, so what do I know,
Talk about Cover Up with John Eric Hexum and what happened with that show.
You
touched on it earlier.
It was a hit. It took off. It was #1 on Saturday night, and the president of CBS Development said to the young lady who was in charge, says, well, you got your first hit, and boom, 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 and we're doing great. And I leave to go to the Carousel Ball up at Marvin Davis's house, and I want to take my star with me. But he's supposed to go to Caesar's Palace and do this high wire stunt. And I said, are you crazy? I don't want you doing that. I leave the set, and before I arrive in Denver, he's going around with a blank gun, and it went off, and blanks, have a serious wad it destroyed his brainstem. And it's one of the saddest things I can ever remember. He had just given my daughter, who was 13 at the time, her first crush on somebody, gave her a chair with her name on it, and we just had dinner at the house the night before. It's one of those things where you just shake your head, when you have a life that's just filled with good luck. Sadder, obviously, for his family, but nevertheless, we really cared for the kid. He was great.
So you were facing a creative decision, though. Do you keep the show going? Do you recast?
The show is based around about 5 models and a guy. I mean, I had very little choice but to recast or cancel. I don't know why you'd cancel. You just don't do that. I mean, a studio wouldn't tolerate that because it's a dramatic show, And but he was not that easy to replace. And the guy we wanted wasn't going to be available because he was in a 2-hour movie.
Who did you want?
And the guy we wound up casting.
I can't think of his name either. He was an Australian actor who later did Mission Impossible.
Yeah, I'm blanking out, but probably deliberately. And it was just that was a sad, period of time with that.
Talk about Trauma Center.
Trauma Center was a serious show with a serious core premise, and that is the first few minutes of the rest of your life depends upon the first few minutes of care you get after a serious trauma. And most hospital rooms, emergency rooms, do not have 2 of the kinds of people you may need at the moment you come in. And I mean, they just don't have that kind of personnel on hand, neurosurgeons or whatever else happens to be. And this is one of those times when you brought up what happens if you have too many shows. And this was one of them where the studio asked me to turn it over to someone because clearly it was going to be a huge effort. And I was very proud of the show, and we sold it, and it looked like it could do very well. Time slot problems. We kept getting back into the same time slot that got vacated by a previous show of our own at ABC. So I didn't have a heavy hand in the execution of it. I think it should have been an automatic. It was ER a couple of years early.
And who were the stars?
Well, we had it was an ensemble cast of about 7 people, and
But no breakout names?
no, Jim. Where's the rest of my people here? I mean, you need the cast.
It's okay.
No, but one of the guys is a very dear man. He went on to star on Broadway in a couple of shows. He's a good guy. But I was pulled away from that show, and later they said, would you step back in? And at that point, I had really given my word that, hey, it's your show. Do what you want with it, and God bless. So.
Let's talk about Half Nelson with Joe Pesci, who I guess wasn't so well known when you launched that series.
Actually, he had done a couple of pretty big movies. That was an idea of Brandon Tartikoff. He came over and said, "I want to do a show about a really short guy. I call it Half Nelson." And Pesci was the choice. We got Dean Martin to play. It was about a guy who came out here who wanted to be an actor. But meantime, he was working for a security company, which meant another current word for detective, protect people, bodyguard, do all those kinds of things. And the guy who ran Celebrity International or whatever it was Dean Martin. So that was fun. It was, and we took a couple of the guys from the light beer ads, and it was a good cast, a good premise. Again, we were hitting a block of stuff. ABC was having some problems then. It didn't much matter what you put on. We kept going against Cosby and a couple of others. So,
The Highwayman, another car show. I guess a truck car show.
yeah, that show it didn't test very well at first. NBC wasn't sure of it. So they backed away for a year. They put it on the air, and it knocked off everything on the air that night. I mean, it was like it knocked off from the Emmys to a big hit movie to another thing, and so they put it on the air. It was a decent show. It should have had a shot. It just again we got a time slot that was not easy. But they just weren't giving those kinds of shows much time. 6-7 weeks, and if it didn't work, they weren't giving full orders. They weren't doing 13 shows. They were giving like 8 shows or 9 shows. Feeling that if it's a gimmick show and the gimmick doesn't work immediately, move on. I think it's short-sighted, but that was their philosophy.
We're going to take a break and